Glad to have you join us. The stories now. European leaders to hold talks with Ukraine's Zelensky ahead of a Trump-Putin summit on Friday. Well, Trump says the European leaders want to see a deal done, but they're expected to reiterate that no decision should be taken without Ukraine when the US and Russian presidents meet in Alaska. Zelensky has held a call with Trump, says Russia should be put under pressure for the sake of a just peace. Meanwhile, Moscow has reiterated its conditions for peace and their demands, which neither Kyiv nor Europe see as viable. Europe reporter Laura Gozzi writes, Trump said last week there would be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both Russia and Ukraine, sparking concern in Kyiv and across the entire Europe. Meanwhile, Russia brands European diplomatic consultations with Ukraine as insignificant ahead of a planned summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, in Alaska on Friday.
We've seen in the past that Putin does much of the talking, and I think he's got the burden, in a way, to try and move Trump in his direction. He's got to try and figure out what will persuade Trump. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant, but will persuade Trump that that Putin seriously wants peace. The real metric here, the person being tested, is Putin. Not will Trump show he's tough, but will Putin be able to get the KGB mojo going again to reestablish the close personal relationship to get what he wants? Trump wants this to be his deal that he makes with Putin, that he then presents to Zelensky, which obviously is very dangerous for the Ukrainians. So, and it certainly fits right into Putin's game plan. Keep the Ukrainians out, keep the pesky Europeans out, just one-on-one between him and Trump.
Мы рассматриваем выпрашиваемые европейцами консультации.
We regard the consultations requested by Europeans as a politically insignificant action. Europeans verbally support the diplomatic efforts of Washington and Moscow to resolve the crisis around Ukraine. In reality, however, the European Union is sabotaging them.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz have held a virtual meeting with US President Donald Trump and other European leaders, with a summit between Trump and Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin looming. Kyiv and its European allies are hoping to convince Trump to respect Ukraine's interest during Friday's meeting in Alaska. Merz says that if there is no movement from Russia towards peace, then Europe and the US will have to put more pressure on Putin.
Actually, a viable solution, a viable way of bringing it to a ceasefire. And now we do have that chance. Vice President Pence, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the work that you put in relation to this alongside our NSAs. Long-standing principle of this group, and I know Volodymyr is on the call and will be absolutely clear in relation to that, are now ready in a form that can be used if we ensure that any peace, if there is peace, is lasting peace. And
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by International Affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Marek, glad to have you join us. Zelensky is saying that more pressure needs to be exerted on Putin to get the desired peace. What do you make of Zelensky's statement?
Well, President Zelensky has his view of what peace should be, which is that Russia should basically give back all the land that is conquered since 2014. And therefore, his view is that Russia should be pressurized into doing this. Now, the point here is that going to work? Is it productive or not? None of that really interests President Zelensky. He just wants the former Ukrainian territory back. And to that end, he believes there should be ever more aid, ever more pressure on Russia. And he has not ceased for the 3.5 years of this conflict to demand more aid and more pressure on Russia on the side of Europe and USA.
I want you to analyze these two statements. Could this be why Zelensky said this? He said, Russia is bluffing. Now, Russia brands as insignificant the diplomatic consultations with Europe. Analyze those two statements. Is he right based on what Russia is saying?
Well, I don't quite see on what basis he's saying is bluffing, except that there is this theory, which has been promulgated now for 3.5 years, that Russia cannot carry on this war, that Russia doesn't have the money, that its economy is fading, faltering, that President Putin is ill, that he can't cope with it all. And as far as one can see, after 3.5 years, Russia is capable of not only pursuing this war, but winning at it. So when he says bluffing, that sense, it would be incorrect, although it is a view held by many commentators that Russia just cannot carry on. If he means that Russia is bluffing in the sense that it really does not want a true peace, well, the point is that Russia does want a peace, but in juxtaposition to what I said previously, it wants it on its terms, ideally the whole of Ukraine, or failing that, huge swathes of its territory under its control. Currently about 20%, of course, of pre-2014 Ukraine. And therefore, it is possible to have a peace, but on whose terms? But if he means it's bluffing in the sense that unless Russia gets exactly what it wants, it won't call a ceasefire, that is not necessarily true. It depends what game Russia is playing, because it could quite easily go for a peace in the short term, but in the medium term, fight another war. So therefore, that, as it stands, this latter explanation is also incorrect.
Now, Trump says there will be severe consequences unless Russia agrees to end the war.
This is the key point. It's not what Zelensky and Europeans say. It is what President Donald Trump says, which is absolutely what is foremost in President Putin's mind. Because he has in mind secondary sanctions, for example, on India, and therefore increasing the sanctions pressure on Russia's allies, or semi-allies to be more exact. And this, of course, might well pay off, because we know that, for example, Iran has wanted the sanctions to be lifted. We know that whenever President Donald Trump has suggested there should be higher tariffs, many countries have immediately scuttled across as fast as they can to try and negotiate a lower tariff rate, because America is, of course, such a huge and important market. And these secondary sanctions might very well be persuading President Putin to, in fact, go for some sort of peace, albeit only a short-term one. So therefore, this is the key point. Can he bring about a peace, that for President Putin, that will be very satisfying to him, and not only therefore would the threat of secondary sanctions disappear, but the threat of normal sanctions, in the sense that he might be able to get those lifted too. That is what this whole conference is about. What terms does President Trump suggest?
Leverage will the EU leaders bring to the table during this meeting?
The leaders, in terms of America and Russia, the leverage is quite simple. President Putin can carry on with this war. There's no reason for him to stop. He has the resources, he has the economy, he has the people, and he is slowly winning. President Donald Trump has the leverage of secondary sanctions. So therefore, there is on both sides an ability to escalate in this sense further and to carry on. Although both sides will settle, I think Donald Trump and President Putin would both settle for some sort of compromise peace, because that's what Donald Trump has in mind, the secession of land. Already he said that Crimea will belong to Russia. So it's a question of how much of the mainland, if I can put it that way, Ukraine, which Russia currently controls, or would want to control, because it is actually claiming a part of Ukraine it has not yet occupied, how much of that is willing to offer. As for other people in this, Zelensky and the Europeans, well, the Europeans have virtually no leverage in this whatsoever. They are, from that point of view, unimportant. Zelensky has one key point. If he does not agree, then in that sense, there will be no peace treaty. But by the same token, it will be there for him that it will be seen to be continuing the war. So again, his leverage is limited. It is Putin and above all President Donald Trump who have the key leverage.
You made a point earlier, and I'm just wondering, clarify this. You said what the European leaders say don't really matter or count, but what Trump says. Just clarified. Why is it what Trump says in this, if you like, triangle? Why is it what Trump says that counts, and not what the European leaders say? Clarify this.
In today's world, there is only one real true huge superpower, that is America. You may count Russia and China also as superpowers, but they're weaker. Europe simply isn't in that league. Even when it does get its act together and all the nations speak with one voice, which isn't true in this regard, because Hungary, of course, is going its own way. But even when they do, they are simply unimportant militarily in comparison to America, unimportant diplomatically in comparison to America. And worst of all, they simply lack the clout in any sense of economics or whatever to really matter all that much. Whereas America, it would only have to switch off all its help, for example, the Starlinks and so on that it has, and suddenly the consequences of Ukraine are terrible. When it did that, when Ukraine had that incursion into Kursk, then in 1 week, the Russians make huge progress simply because the Americans weren't helping. So it really hinges on American military aid, whose size and whose hardware is unmatched by Europe and will be unmatched for many years to come, simply because Europe is no longer there as the number one power. 200 years ago? Sure. Even 100 years ago? Sure. Today, no.
Hey, no. All right, before I let you go, what do you make of the warning by Keir Starmer of UK to Trump not to trust Putin, especially in the light of the fact that Putin is one of the best intelligence officers before he became president?
Oh, I think President Trump knows that fairly well. It's quite clear that President Putin has his skills. He's, after all, been in the job for many years as president, and he's a politician above all who understands politics and is quite clear. What is noted, please, is that Russia is now thinking of testing new missiles or doing missile tests. It is also quite clear, and here President Zelensky is right, that Russia is still carrying on being the aggressor and marching forward. So in all this, there is to be noted that President Putin is not only a skillful operator diplomatically, but he is currently expanding his military in that sense. And in here, of course, then Keir Starmer is correct to make sure that whatever agreement is reached, and it cannot be a treaty without Zelensky, but it could be an agreement, has to take into account that President Putin is not to be 100% trusted, that he won't start another war or carry on fighting in the meantime.
All right, we'll leave it there. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, international affairs correspondent, international affairs analyst rather. Thank you for being on the program.